$4.8 trillion. That is the number. It is not a rounding error. It is not a theoretical loss in a future projection. It is the exact amount of wealth that was extracted from the American economy in a single year through a mechanism so efficient, so silent, and so predatory that most victims thanked the people robbing them. While you were watching the stock market hit all-time highs, while you were arguing about the latest political scandal, and while you were being told that the consumer is resilient, the American middle class suffered the largest confiscation of liquid wealth in recorded history, $4.8 trillion. To put that into perspective, that is more than the GDP of Germany. It is more than the entire value of the global crypto market. It is more than all the physical cash currently circulating in the United States. And it is gone. It didn't disappear in a market crash. If the stock market had dropped 20% overnight, you would be panicked. You would be in the streets. You would be demanding answers. But this theft was designed to be invisible. It was designed to happen transaction by transaction, premium by premium, interest payment by interest payment. By the end of this video, you will understand exactly where that $4.8 trillion went. You will see the specific mechanism, the inflationary siphon, that transferred this wealth from your savings account to the balance sheets of the insurance cartels, the healthcare monopolies, and the sovereign debt servicers. And most importantly, you will understand that this vanishing was not an accident. It was a requirement. The system needed your capital to plug its own holes. This is not a recession. A recession is when the economy shrinks. This is a liquidation. A liquidation is when the assets of the weak are sold off to pay the debts of the strong. This is stage 3 of the pattern we discuss on this channel, the silent exodus. For those new here, let me explain the framework. Every dying economic order follows 4 distinct stages. Stage 1 is ascension. Stage 2 is overextension. Stage 3 is extraction. And stage 4 is collapse. We are deep in stage 3. This is the phase where the elites realize the national debt is mathematically unpayable. They realize the promises made to the boomer generation, the pensions, the healthcare, the social security, cannot be kept with honest money. So they begin to extract the wealth of the population to keep the system on life support for just a few more years. They don't raise taxes. That would cause a revolution. They devalue the currency and monopolize the cost of survival. They make you pay $8 for a carton of eggs and $2,000 for a minor emergency room visit. They force you to dip into your savings just to exist. That is where the $4.8 trillion figure starts. It begins with the single largest line item in the American extraction machine, healthcare. In 2023, the United States spent exactly $4.8 trillion on national health expenditures. That is a 7.5% increase from the year before, outpacing GDP growth. But here's the catch. Outcomes didn't improve. Life expectancy didn't go up. You didn't get healthier. You just got poorer. This $4.8 trillion didn't buy assets. It didn't build bridges. It didn't fund R&D. It was a consumption tax levied on the biological necessity of staying alive. It was wealth transferred from households to the medical industrial complex. But that is only half the story. The vanishing also refers to the excess savings that Americans built up during the pandemic. Do you remember when they told you that Americans were flush with cash, and that was the narrative? The consumer is strong. They were lying. The consumer wasn't strong. The consumer was being fattened up for the slaughter. In 2021, American households had $2.1 trillion in excess savings, cash reserves built up from stimulus checks and staying home. By mid-2024, the San Francisco Fed confirmed that for the bottom 80% of the population, that number is effectively zero. It is gone, drained, siphoned off to pay for the 20% inflation in food, energy, and insurance. And now the extraction has gone negative. Americans have begun liquidating their long-term assets. We are seeing record withdrawals from 401ks for hardship reasons. We are seeing the depletion of emergency funds. We are seeing the tapping of home equity lines of credit, HELOCs, just to buy groceries. This is exactly what happened in the Weimar Republic in 1922, before the wheelbarrows of cash appeared. The German middle class didn't lose their money all at once. First, their savings slowly stopped covering their bills. Then they had to sell their family silver. Then they had to sell their land. The wealth didn't vanish. It transferred. It transferred to the industrialists, who had borrowed heavily and could pay back their debts with the money the middle class was bleeding. We are seeing the American version of this tragedy. But it is faster, and it is digitized. The vanishing is happening through 3 specific channels that we are going to expose in this video. Channel 1 is the healthcare vampire. We will show how this sector has become the primary mechanism for draining middle-class liquidity. Channel 2 is the debt service trap. As interest rates spiked to fight the inflation they created, the cost of servicing credit card debt and auto loans doubled. The The money you used to save is now going to JP Morgan and Citibank just to pay the interest on the card you used to buy gas. Channel 3 is the asset illusion. The government tells you your house is worth more. They tell you the stock market is up. But if you try to sell that house, you realize the transaction costs, the taxes, and the new mortgage rates make it impossible to move. You are house poor and cash broke. This is the silent exodus. The liquidity is leaving the people and moving to the state and the corporations that serve the state. The $4.8 trillion is gone. You are not getting it back. The question now is, how much more will they take before stage 4 begins? In the next section, I am going to break down the healthcare vampire in detail. I am going to show you the data from the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services that proves the system is engineered to extract maximum capital for minimum service. We are going to look at the numbers that prove the middle class is financing its own extinction. Let's go to the numbers. Channel 1 is the healthcare vampire. If you want to understand where your savings went, you don't need to look at the Federal Reserve. You need to look at your hospital bill. You need to look at your insurance premium. You need to look at the $5,000 deductible that resets every January, ensuring that you are technically insured but practically bankrupt if you actually get sick. The United States spent $4.8 trillion on healthcare in 2023. That is the exact number of the wealth that vanished. It is a perfect dollar-for-dollar match. But calling it healthcare is a lie. It isn't healthcare, it is wealth extraction. In any other industry, technology makes things cheaper. Computers get cheaper, TVs get cheaper, food production gets cheaper. But in American medicine, technology makes things exponentially more expensive. Why? Because the goal isn't to cure you. The goal is to maximize the lifetime value of the patient. We are watching the financialization of biology. Let's break down the mechanism because it is the most sophisticated theft ring in human history. It starts with consolidation. 20 years ago, your doctor ran their own practice. They were a small business owner. They charged reasonable rates because they had to compete with the doctor down the street. That era is dead. Today, nearly 50% of all physicians in the United States are employed by massive hospital systems or private equity firms. The independent doctor has been liquidated. They were bought out, rolled up, and turned into employees of a corporate conglomerate. And what happens when a monopoly takes over? Prices explode. When a private equity firm buys a physician practice, the prices don't go up by 3% for inflation. They go up by 20%, 30%, sometimes 50% overnight. They add facility fees. If you see your doctor in a hospital-owned building, they charge you a rent fee just for walking in the door. It's an extra $500 on the bill that provides zero medical value. It is pure profit. This is the consolidation tax, and it is draining billions from the middle class every month. But the real weapon, the weapon that drains your savings account, is the deductible. The high-deductible health plan is the greatest trick ever pulled by the financial sector. They shifted the risk from the insurance company to you. You pay the premium every month. That's the subscription fee. But when you actually need care, you have to pay the first $3,000, $5,000, or $10,000 out of your own pocket. Do you remember the excess savings we talked about? The $2.1 trillion Americans saved during the pandemic? Where do you think it went? It went to the deductible. It went to paying for the knee surgery, the emergency room visit, the insulin. The insurance company didn't pay it. You paid it. You transferred your liquid capital to the hospital system, which then transferred it to the pharmaceutical companies, which then used it to buy back their own stock. This is the inflationary siphon. It takes money from the productive economy, you, and moves it to the rent-seeking economy, them. And who is driving this? Private equity. The sharks have smelled the blood in the water. Private equity firms now own over 460 hospitals and more than 6,000 physician practices in the U.S. They are buying up emergency rooms. They are buying up anesthesiology groups. Why? Because you have no price elasticity in an emergency. If you are having a heart attack, you don't shop around. You don't ask for a discount. You pay whatever they ask. It is the ultimate captive market. And the private equity model is simple. Buy the practice, fire the support staff, replace doctors with cheaper nurse practitioners, and triple the prices. The result is a healthcare system that costs 300% more than any other developed nation, but delivers lower life expectancy. You are paying a Porsche price for a broken bicycle. And this brings us to the most insidious part of the vampire, the charge master. Every hospital has a secret list of prices called the charge master. It is completely arbitrary. They can charge $200 for an aspirin. They can charge $5,000 for a CT scan that costs $100 to perform. When you see a hospital bill, you are looking at fiction. But if you have savings, they will sue you for that fiction. They will put a lien on your house. They will garnish your wages. They are the most aggressive debt collectors in the country. The non-profit hospital down the street, it's a hedge fund with an ER. It pays its CEO $10 million a year while suing patients who make $40,000. This is why the $4.8 trillion vanished. It wasn't spent on goods. It wasn't spent on fun. It was extracted to pay the monopoly rents of a system that has captured the biological necessities of life. But draining your savings wasn't enough. The vampire needs more blood. Once your savings hit zero, you didn't stop getting sick. You didn't stop needing care. So what did you do? You borrowed. And this leads us to Channel 2, the debt service trap. When the savings ran out in 2023, the credit cards came out. And that is when the trap snapped shut. Because you didn't just borrow money. You borrowed money at the highest interest rates in 22 years. You moved from being a source of capital to being a source of yield. In the next part, I'm going to show you the math of the debt trap. I'm going to show you how a $5,000 medical bill on a credit card turns into a $15,000 liability that you will be paying off for a decade. We are going to look at the delinquency data that the banks are trying to hide. The car loans are failing. The credit cards are maxed out. The vampire has drained the savings. Now the banks are coming for the income. Let's look at the debt. Channel 2 is the debt service trap. This is the phase of the extraction that turns a temporary crisis into a permanent condition. Once the healthcare vampire and the cost of living inflation drained the $4.8 trillion in savings, the American consumer didn't stop spending. They couldn't. You cannot stop buying food. You cannot stop putting gas in the car. You cannot stop paying the electric bill. So, when the cash ran out, the plastic came out. In the last 18 months, Americans added over $300 billion in new credit card debt. The total balance is now over $113 billion. But the amount of debt isn't the trap. The cost of the debt is the trap. You see, the Federal Reserve played a very clever trick. To fight the inflation that they created by printing money, they raised interest rates at the fastest pace in 40 years. They told you this was to cool the economy. That is a lie. Raising rates doesn't lower the price of eggs. Raising rates doesn't make gas cheaper. What raising rates does is increase the profit margin of the banks. In 2021, the average interest rate on a credit card was 14%. Today it is over 22%. For subprime borrowers, the people who already drained their savings, it is over 30%. This is the rug pull. They encouraged you to borrow when rates were zero, and then they jacked up the cost of service when you were most vulnerable. This $4.8 trillion in lost wealth didn't just vanish into thin air, it transformed. It transformed from your capital into their yield. When you carry a balance at 22%, you are no longer a participant in the economy. You are an employee of the bank. You are working for Visa. You are working for Capital One. Every hour of labor you perform is taxed not just by the government, but by the financial sector. And the most brutal part of the debt trap is the auto loan bubble. During the pandemic, Americans were told to buy cars. Drive the recovery, they said. Prices skyrocketed. People took out $50,000 loans for Ford F-150s and Toyotas, often paying $5,000 or $10,000 over MSRP. Now the trap has snapped. Used car prices are crashing. The asset is depreciating, but the debt is fixed. We are seeing a tsunami of negative equity. This is when you owe $40,000 on a car that is worth $25,000. You cannot sell it. You cannot trade it in. You are trapped in the loan. And because interest rates are so high, the monthly payment on a new car is now averaging over $730. For millions of Americans, their car payment is higher than their rent was 10 years ago. The debt service trap ensures that even if you get a raise, even if you work a second job, you cannot get ahead. The interest eats the progress. It is a mathematical prison. But the extraction isn't finished. The system has one more channel to drain the remaining wealth of the middle class. And this is the one that hurts the most because it involves the American dream itself. Channel 3 is the asset illusion. They tell you that you are richer because your house went up in value. They point to Zillow. They point to the homeowner equity charts and say, look, Americans have $30 trillion in home equity. The household balance sheet is strong. This is the greatest gaslight in financial history. Equity is illiquid wealth. You cannot buy groceries with your kitchen. You cannot pay for your child's college with your backyard. To use that wealth, you have to sell the house or borrow against it. And that is where the trap reveals itself. The lock-in effect has frozen the housing market. Most Americans have a mortgage rate of 3% or 4% from the good old days. If they sell their house today, they have to buy a new one at 7% or 8%. The math doesn't work. The monthly payment for the same house would double. So nobody is selling. The wealth is trapped in the walls. It is a number on a screen that you cannot access. But while you can't access the wealth, the government can access the tax revenue. Property taxes are exploding across the country. They are reassessing your home at these new inflated Zillow prices and sending you a tax bill that is 40% higher than last year. So you have an asset you cannot sell, generating a tax bill you cannot afford, forcing you to use your credit card at 22% interest to pay the government. Do you see the cycle? Do you see how the $4.8 trillion vanished? It wasn't one big theft. It was 1,000 small cuts. It was the deductible. It was the premium hike. It was the interest rate spike. It was the property tax reassessment. It is a symbiotic extraction. The government, the banks, and the healthcare monopolies are all feeding on the same host, the American middle class. This is why the economy feels broken even when the GDP is growing. The GDP measures the transfer of money, not the prosperity of the people. When you pay $10,000 to a hospital for a procedure that cost $500, the GDP goes up, the economy grew, but you got poorer. The $4.8 trillion figure is the scorecard of this transfer. And now we arrive at the most dangerous part of stage 3. We have drained the savings. We have maxed out the credit. We have trapped the assets. What is left? What happens when there is no more blood to squeeze from the stone? That is when stage 4 begins. That is when the system, realizing it can no longer extract value from the host, decides to sacrifice the host entirely to save the currency, or sacrifice the currency to save the debt. In the final part of this video, I'm going to explain the end game of this $4.8 trillion extraction. I'm going to show you why the retirement crisis is the next shoe to drop. The 401ks are being drained now, which means the poverty of the future is being guaranteed today, and I will give you the only solution that works in an extraction economy. You cannot save your way out of this. You cannot budget your way out of 22% interest and 300% healthcare inflation. You have to opt out of the extraction channels entirely. Let's look at the future. Let's look at what happens when the money runs out. The extraction is nearly complete. The excess savings are gone, the credit cards are maxed out, the home equity is trapped, the system has successfully drained $4.8 trillion from the current purchasing power of the middle class. But the system is a beast that must be fed. And now that your current money is gone, it has turned its eyes to your future money. This brings us to the end game of the silent exodus, the retirement heist. If you think your 401k is safe, you are not looking at the data. You are looking at the balance, not the behavior. In 2024 and 2025, we saw a record number of Americans taking hardship withdrawals from their retirement accounts. According to Vanguard and Fidelity, the number of people raiding their nest eggs for emergency expenses has doubled since 2018. This is the final stage of liquidation. When you sell your retirement assets to pay for today's groceries, you are not just spending money, you are eating your seed corn. You are guaranteeing that you will be destitute in old age. But here's the darker truth. The government wants you to drain these accounts. Or more accurately, they want to control what remains in them. Your 401k is not filled with gold. It is not filled with Bitcoin. It is filled with stocks and bonds. And who is the biggest issuer of bonds? The U.S. government. Your retirement account is the buyer of last resort for the U.S. national debt. As foreign nations like China and Japan stop buying U.S. treasuries, as we covered in previous videos, the government needs a new source of capital to fund its deficit. That source is you. There are already proposals in Washington to mandate that a certain percentage of 401k assets be invested in government bonds for safety. This is called financial repression. It is forcing you to lend money to a bankrupt state at an interest rate that is lower than inflation. This is the ultimate vanishing. You will see a number on your screen, maybe $500,000, maybe $1 million, but that money will be locked in government debt that pays 4%, while the cost of living rises by 10%. You will have money, but you will have no purchasing power. So, what is the end game? The end game is stage 4, the collapse. When the savings are gone and the credit is tapped and the retirement funds are sterilized by inflation, the consumer stops consuming, the tax revenue collapses, the deficit explodes. And then, the Great Reset is not a conspiracy theory, it is a mathematical necessity. They will have to revalue the currency or default on the debt. So, how do you opt out? How do you protect yourself when the healthcare vampire, the debt trap, and the asset illusion are all working against you? You have to build a parallel treasury. First, you must stop storing your wealth in the extraction channels. Do not keep excess cash in a bank account where it earns 0.01% and is vulnerable to inflation. You must convert your savings into real assets. Real assets are things that cannot be printed and cannot be easily taxed into oblivion. Gold, silver, Bitcoin, held in self-custody, land, tools, skills. Second, you must attack the debt trap. If you have high-interest debt, you are an indentured servant. You must liquidate whatever toys you have, the extra car, the gadgets, the subscriptions, to kill that 22% interest rate. You cannot invest your way out of a 22% hole. You have to fill it. Third, and this is controversial, you must rethink your relationship with the healthcare vampire. The best way to starve the beast is to get healthy. The metabolic crisis in America is the fuel for the financial extraction. By reclaiming your biological sovereignty, eating real food, exercising, rejecting the pill for every ill model, you are removing yourself from the most efficient extraction mechanism in the economy. The $4.8 trillion did not vanish by accident. It was taken. It was taken because you played by the old rules in a new game. The old rules said, save cash, buy a house, trust the 401k. The new rules say, buy hard assets, minimize debt, trust nothing that has a counterparty. The silent exodus is almost over. The noise is about to begin, the noise of a currency breaking, the noise of a social contract tearing. You still have a little bit of time. The window is closing, but it is not shut. You can still reposition. You can still become the CEO of your own family office. I am economy meet history. The data is clear. The pattern is absolute. The wealth didn't vanish. It just moved. Now it's your turn to move. Subscribe to the channel because in the next video, I am going to break down the sovereign debt spiral and show you exactly which date the U.S. interest payments will consume 100% of tax revenue. The clock is ticking. I'll see you in the next video.